For the past several months, I have been warning everyone that the private equity industry was creating a massive bubble in our economy that was about to pop. Well, it just went, and right now they have sent all of their lobbyists to Washington, D.C. to beg the government for a bailout. And it's happening. Donald Trump and his administration are issuing an executive order that will take $12 trillion of your retirement savings, not taxpayer money, your money, and it will bail out not only the private equity industry, but their biggest investors. They're going to bail out Harvard and Yale and every billionaire investor private equity is about to grift. Let's get into it. That's right, everybody. Trump is set to issue an executive order that will open the floodgates and allow private equity funds to access and tap $12 trillion in 401k holdings in America. And the same people that control your 401ks have debt that is stuck with private equity right now, giving them poor returns and in desperate need of a capital infusion. No conflict of interest here, everybody. Just look the other way. Private equity is in big trouble. They need a bailout fast, and you are their only hope. But don't worry. Don't worry. It's going to be good for you. It's going to be the deal of a lifetime for you. That's right. Harvard and Yale, they're trying to sell their private equity funds and no one will buy them. But if you help buy them, you're going to get 1,000% windfalls. 1,000% windfalls in a day. Because definitely, if the wealthy had a chance to make 1,000% windfalls, they would absolutely be sharing it with you. They wouldn't keep it for themselves. They want everybody to be wealthy, obviously. And that's why they're promising 1,000% windfalls that will make your brain melt if you just let them have access to your 401k. So how did we get here? Well, over the last 30 years, private equity as a sector has been able to run roughshod over the entire American economy. They have strip mined every single industry with unmitigated access and absolute clearance by every single politician. They have paid to clear the runways and give them clear skies to do whatever they wanted to do to the American economy. They've destroyed jobs. They've destroyed companies. They've destroyed communities. But they did all of that with record low costs for debt. The interest was almost zero. And so with cheap debt and the belief that they'd be able to refinance if anything ever went wrong, they've been allowed to do this with no real concerns until 3 years ago when our interest rates started going up. Debt is no longer cheap. And at this point, these companies have leveraged billions and billions of dollars onto all of the things that they've acquired. And they're paying double-digit interest rates, sometimes between 14 and 21% at this point, because they took on all this debt at adjustable rates. And those adjustable rates have come calling. And where they used to be able to turn over every company they acquired every 3 years, now no one is buying. The institutional investors and the wealthy are saying, we're out. Harvard and Yale are saying, we're out. And what we have is a bunch of private equity funds that are desperate to close out their funds and close out for their investors, and they're stuck. Nothing is moving because there's no money coming into the industry, and they can't borrow anymore because the interest is too high. And that's why the only hope they have is you. One of the questions that I get all the time is, how does private equity make their money? If they destroy all these businesses, why do they still get so rich? And the reality is that what happens is that private equity makes their money on their fee structures. They don't make the money on the success of the companies they acquire. They can strip mine all of it. They can dispose of all the assets. They can leave rubble in what they've acquired because they make their money on the fees. Whereas a typical 401k, you would pay maybe 0.5% or like maybe 0.6% of your investment in fees. But with private equity, you pay 2% of the total amount you have invested annually, and you pay 20% of your returns. So just as an example, if you invested 50 grand with your 401k and it was just standard investments and you made $150,000, over 10 years, you would pay about $7,700 in fees to the management of that fund. But in private equity, you would pay $52,700 in fees over that same period of time, meaning that on average, you're going to give 60% of your returns just to the money managers at the private equity firms. And that's why they are so desperate for your 401ks. They need the capital, but they also need the fees, and they need you to pay them. And while Harvard and Yale are promising 1,000% windfalls that will make your brain melt, you should probably understand why Yale and Harvard are offloading all of their private equity assets. You see, about 25 years ago, Yale actually laid the groundwork to change the way that the endowments that they manage were invested. And now at this point, Yale has about 95% of their supposed $46 billion endowment invested in alternative assets, primarily private equity. Okay. But the problem is that their returns on those investments have come to a halt. Over the last couple of years, their returns have only been like 5 to 6%, while during that same time period, the regular S&P 500 has gone up 95%. So their funds are just not performing as well as what your 401k is performing in traditional investment mechanisms. But the bigger problem is that they thought they'd be able to sell those stakes. They thought that they could post them for sale and everyone would want to buy them. Well, it didn't work. They started trying to sell their private equity holdings about 7 or 8 months ago, and they got no interest. Then they moved them to something called the secondaries market. The secondaries market is like a Ponzi scheme. Even the Financial Times calls it a pyramid scheme for private equity, where what they do is if they can't get regular institutional investors to buy, they start selling it to one another. And they say, I can't get rid of it and I need to close out my stakes. Do you have anything like that you can't get rid of? How about we swap and it'll buy us some time? And then we'll put the original estimated value as the value, even though we sold it for 50% less. And for 10 years, no one will know that it's worthless. And then on their books, it still looks like they have money. And it looks like they were able to close out their funds successfully. But it's not. It's a house of cards that eventually will come tumbling down. And their hope is that it ends up being your 401k that is holding it when that happens. And in their desperation to sell their stakes, we've gotten a really good look at what is normally hidden behind closed doors in private equity. A good example is that billionaire hedge fund owner Bill Ackman recently said, and he's a Harvard alumnus, that 40% of Harvard's endowment is in private equity. And at this point, he believes the value is entirely inflated, that they don't have anywhere near the amount of money that they purport that they have in their endowment, and that all of it is locked up, and so they're actually cash poor. Now, we just talked about the danger of the fees that private equity charges and why your 401k would end up forfeiting 60% of anything you did make to fees that just pad the pockets of billionaires. But I want to give you a real world example of what that looks like. Okay, right now it is estimated that Yale is paying $1.23 billion a year in management fees for their private equity investments while only getting 5.3 to 7% returns. That is an asinine figure when all of their money is locked up and overstated. And right now it is estimated that Harvard, with only 40% of their endowment in private equity, is paying $1.48 billion a year just to manage the funds that are not performing, that they cannot sell and cannot get rid of, which is making them cash poor, and they are losing their ability to move within their own financial mechanisms right now. Historically, the average holding period for any asset that private equity acquired was approximately 3 to 4 years. That means every 3 to 4 years, they would flip it to the next schmuck, they would stack it with more debt, and they would get out clean with all of their riches. But right now, they're having to hold for 6 to 7 years because nothing has been moving for the last 3 years at all. We've created a $3 trillion backlog in the industry with contracts that mandate that they have to get out and pay their investors with no hope of doing so. The last time that we had this kind of a backlog was just before the 2007-2008 housing collapse. Because they can't get any more capital from institutional investors, they are desperate for fresh sources of capital and dependent basically on securing those needs from us because there's nowhere left to obtain money. And Trump can't risk a public bailout. So instead, he's offering up this workaround that the 401ks and private equity have been desperately lobbying him for. He's going to give them access to your 401k money. And here's the thing, by opening up the 401k market, the system will be flooded with fresh capital. There's $12.2 trillion in the 401k market. And right now, private equity is about $3 to $4 trillion upside down. So there's certainly enough money there. But the decision making will be done by the same investors that manage your 401k. These are the same people that desperately need that money to clear up in the backlog of private equity because they're also invested there. These people don't care about you. They need your money and they're going to use it. And they're going to put the artificially inflated value on the books for you for the next 10 years. So you won't even know what's happened to your 401k until it's too late. And all of those companies have gone bankrupt and all of your money has gone to fees. You won't even know what hit you. You have to understand that the funds that you would be buying into are full of overvalued, unsellable, over debt burdened assets. If they were valuable, people would be buying them. But they have stacked everything with so much debt and strip mined all the assets out already. So there's simply nothing left to get out of it. And that's why they're promising you 1,000% windfalls, telling you you're going to get the deal of a lifetime. You finally get to join the club. Well, as George Carlin said, baby, it's a big club and you ain't in it. If these returns were real, they'd be using them for themselves. They wouldn't be giving them to you. While they're going to pitch this as a democratization of the private equity system, finally opening the doors and letting you into the big boys club, what it really is a last-ditch effort for a liquid injection into a system that is so desperate for dry powder that because it's run out of institutional suckers. But there's a whole wide world of new suckers that they haven't even started to tap, and that's you. Everyday Americans have been locked out of this boom, right? For 30 years, they've made record profits, record money while destroying our communities. And now the situation is dire. Primary value has fallen. They're strip mined. The rich have gotten richer. And just like in 2008, it's now time to socialize the risk while they keep the upside with the privatized wealthy and no risk for them. And you will end up holding the bag 10 years from now when you look at your 401k and wonder what happened. Socialism and bailouts for them, capitalism and burdens for us. So as they try to put lipstick on this pig over the next couple weeks, trying to sell you on this deal of a lifetime, I ask you this. If investing in private equity were so good for your 401k, if it were so good for you and not for them, why is it that for the last 7 years straight, private equity industry has been desperately lobbying for access to the $12 trillion in 401ks? Why is it not that the 401k managers have been lobbying for that access if it was so good? Why is it private equity that needs your money? They aren't helping you, but that doesn't mean we have to go quietly. Let's talk about what we can do right now to protect our assets. In this moment, every single one of you should be contacting Trump and his people and demanding that he abandon his plans to issue this executive order. You should be demanding that he protect your 401ks from private equity abuse and exploitation. And if that does not work, there are dozens of plaintiffs' law firms right now standing at the ready to help you file class action lawsuits against your 401k managers if they allow them to get $1 from your 401k account assigned over to the private equity firms and their horrific new fee structures. Because even the wealthy can't escape their fees. This is how they make their money. Right now, unable to close out the funds they promised the ultra wealthy, needing your money to fix it, even now the ultra wealthy are paying $700 billion in fees a year on assets they can't sell. If you'd like to contact Donald J. Trump or your senators and representatives to demand that they protect your 401ks from the exploitation that's coming at the hands of private equity, you can follow the link in my bio. I just want to end by asking you, why is it then when we can't pay our bills, when we suffer the downside effects of capitalism, we pay that price? But when big banks, big investors, and the wealthy, when they make bad investments, they always get bailed out. Why is there always socialism for them, but capitalism for us? And why is it always capitalism that is the excuse when it becomes corrupted, right? Like, we need to start demanding more. And I'm not advocating for socialism. I'm specifically advocating against it. If a company makes a bad investment, it should fail. If the wealthy make bad investments, they should go bankrupt. And we need to protect ourselves and our families. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany. We work together to fight private equity and to save small businesses in our community. Today, we're fighting for the little bit of something that we've been allowed to accrue in this wide, wide world of struggle. We are fighting for everything that we have left and the only hope of a future that many, many Americans have at all.